All right. It's great to see you for another great week, and not only another great week, but another great chapter and another great topic. We have been discussing the last couple weeks what some people might call in Tanya the troubleshooting section. The Tanya has an entire section on what we should and shouldn't do. How to live our life as the most meaningful way, and to realize that we have a battle and a war going on inside of us. Between the godly soul and the animal soul. And the troubleshooting section is different reasons why whatever I'm trying to do in my service of God is not working. So the main problem that we've dealt with till now that might prevent our service of God from working is depression or sadness. I don't want to say the word depression, but getting sad, getting down. Let's use the word down. Being down, someone who's down. Why are they down? There could be a variety of reasons. It could be physical, it could be spiritual. And that was the discussion of the last couple chapters. Or actually last chapter. That was the discussion of the last two chapters. 26 and 27 was about someone who is down, whether due to physical or spiritual reasons. And if you're down, automatically the understanding that we have a war between the godly soul and the animal soul, because there's a war when you're down, it's very hard to win that war. And so it's a very simple equation. That's why it's called the troubleshooting section. It's not getting into what do you have to do to serve God? What is considered serving God? That really was the discussion of all the previous chapters. Now we just get into, all right, what if you are sad? What's the problem with that? Well, that's going to prevent you from your service of God. Then now we're going to have a different troubleshooting, which is not sadness per se, but another very important element that the Tanya considers very, very important in the service of God, and that is prayer. What do I mean by that? If we recall in the Tanya discussed that prayer is a very, very important time in the service of God. Why? Because that is a time when we can really gear up our godly soul, right? If we understand that there's a war between the animal soul and the godly soul, we said that even someone who struggles all the time with the animal soul, during prayer, they can possibly put their animal soul to sleep. You can pray with such devotion. It's a time of great devotion of the godly soul, and that heat and that energy should carry you through the rest of your day. So prayer is a very, very important time. And obviously, really, any time you serve God is an important time, but prayer especially. And so this next section is going to be, what if while you're trying to pray, or he also says study, but what if while you're trying to pray or study, you get thoughts, you get disturbing thoughts. Now, I know this is a theoretical idea. This never happens to anybody else. But can you imagine you're praying and suddenly your mind gets distracted? Now, I don't know if any of you here relate to this. But seriously, obviously, you do relate to it to some extent, but I don't know if you relate to it to the extent that someone who's religious. Seriously, someone who's religious for a long time, I would say, is more likely to have their mind wander during prayer because they pray so often, because the words can come out of their mouth so automatically, you can literally go somewhere else. And because we pray every day, and we pray every day for half an hour at least in the morning, it's so easy to get distracted during our prayer because we're praying the same words, and I can literally pray and totally lose myself to thought and go somewhere else, whatever it is in business or whatever else you need to do. They tell the joke that one time a Jew came to his Rebbe and said, Rebbe, I have a problem. I just paid the local the local landowner, money, and I think I paid him a little too little. I hope he doesn't notice. So the Rebbe told him, don't worry about it. The pirates doesn't daven. He won't notice. When you daven, the joke is, when people daven, suddenly think about their business and everything that's going on and all the things they need to do. But that's actually really going to be the one of the defining what I say, lessons and enduring lessons of this chapter, because some of the things in this chapter may seem out of reach for some of us, or may not have even been something we think of. But what I gained from this chapter the most is that the evil inclination and the animal soul is most active when you are trying to do your best. That's my takeaway from this chapter that we're going to study, is that if you're getting disturbed while you're praying, it's actually a sign that you're doing pretty well. And the other thing is to recognize that when you have disturbances during your prayer, a lot of times the disturbances are actually not that important. You'll find that whatever you're thinking about during prayer or during study, and today, by the way, we have built-in distractions, right? We have our phones and we have messages we need to respond to, and you might be praying, you have messages, or we might have a business meetings we need to get to. There's always a lot of times today we're in such a world when we're doing one thing, we're thinking of the next thing. But you'll find a lot that those thoughts will disturb you more during prayer. And what you'll find is that after prayer, those thoughts will not be as bothersome. In other words, during prayer, you'll think about all the things you need to do, or during a Torah study class, you'll think about all the things you need to do. Just for example, right now, you're taking time out of your busy day of lunch. I would guess, I don't know for sure, I would guess that whatever business pressures that are on your head could feel even stronger when you're praying. Could feel even stronger now during the Tanya class. Why? Because the Yetzer Hara doesn't want you to do something good. So it's going to make you feel really guilty taking an hour off of business to study Torah. And that is, again, my takeaway from the class is that when we have disturbing thoughts during our prayers or study, number one, realize that whatever is disturbing you may not be so important. And number two, and they're both connected, is realize that maybe the reason it's disturbing you is because it realizes that you're doing such a great job at studying and prayer. So don't get depressed over well, I don't think people here are going to get depressed. That's not really the point. The point is, how do we deal with disturbing thoughts? The answer is to recognize and realize that they're coming from the evil inclination within us that does not like to see us being successful. And so it's going to put on our head the most effort whenever you're praying. If you're watching a soccer game, it will not disturb you with as many business concerns as it will when you're studying a Tanya class. So it's up to us to be cognizant of ourselves, to look at ourselves and to know ourselves and say, hey, I'm getting this thought, but was I thinking the same thing when I was watching the basketball game or the soccer game? And that's really my takeaway. But now let's see how the Tanya presents this. So the Tanya starts off again, it's troubleshooting. The troubleshooting here is, how do we deal with disturbing thoughts during prayer and during Torah study? We need to pray. We need to have Torah study, because without prayer and without Torah study, we are going to have, well, that's just a big part of serving God. Let me just, why is this, one second. One second. It's not, I'm sorry. Give me a second. All right, let me share the screen again one more time. Okay, so let's take a look here. Okay. Oh, that's what I was doing wrong. Okay. Chapter 28 says like this. Chapter 28 is the last of 3 chapters that offer us tools to avoid sadness in a variety of settings. After discussing sadness caused by inappropriate actions in chapter 26, chapter 27 taught us how to deal with inappropriate thoughts and desires so as to not allow them to dampen our spirits. But so far, we have learned only how to deal with inappropriate thoughts that occur in general settings, such as business or leisure. It is more disturbing, however, when these thoughts plague us when we're trying to pray or study Torah. What do we do then? And by the way, this chapter is all about distraction. So I would also say that if a chapter of distraction was important, today's day and age, where we are more distracted than ever, it's even more important. I mean, what did the guy in the shtetl have to be distracted with? There wasn't that much, Today, there's 2 billion channels on TV, plus every video on YouTube and every piece of breaking news. I mean, There's no end to distractions. So here is a very important chapter to us, even if some of the ideas in here may not relate to us as much, but I'll of course try to make them all relatable. So he says like this: even if while worshiping God in Torah study or devotional prayer, you begin to fantasize about physical indulgences or other inappropriate thoughts. All right, now I'm just going to pause it here, and it really doesn't make a difference what the thoughts are. The point is that you're having thoughts during your prayer that are inappropriate, okay? When he says inappropriate, he doesn't mean they're necessarily sinful. They could be thoughts about eating a brownie, okay? Indulgences, okay? The point is, it's disturbing you from your prayer. So he says, Al yashas levalim, do not turn your heart to them, rather divert your attention away from them immediately. So we have to remember that Tanya is one long book. This harkens back to the chapters in the beginning of the Tanya, when we spoke about the clothing, the garments of the soul. Anybody recall? I think that was chapter 4, I believe. That was chapter 4, yes. Chapter 4, we discussed the garments of the soul. If you recall, we said that there's our inner self, there's our character, so to speak, and then there's our thought, speech, and action. And thought, speech, and action, we called it clothing because we can change it. I can, even if I don't change my character, I can choose to do an action. I can choose to say something, even if I don't mean it, and I can actually choose to think something. And so that's what he means. So you get a thought, he's basically saying ignore it. Now, people have a variety of different ways of how they deal with thoughts. Now, again, this is not a feeling. This is just a thought, okay? This is not a feeling, it's a thought. And so in thoughts, his point is, remember, thoughts are just, they're not inherently you. And so when you think one thought, you can think another thought, okay? Now, obviously, he doesn't mean, like we say, don't think about the pink elephant, right? He doesn't mean stop thinking about what you're thinking. He means think about something else. So if you're in the middle of prayer, focus more on your prayers. So you get a thought, don't try to fight the thought. Go back into your prayer. Go look at your prayer book. Because there might be a tendency to fight the thought, and fighting a thought is usually a losing battle, particularly as we understand from the Tanya, is that why are you having a thought? Because there's two souls. There's two souls, so the animal soul is trying to give you a thought, and so you just move on to something else that you're going to think about, which is the prayers. Now he's going to talk about something which is very interesting. There's a concept in the Kabbalah, in the Kabbalistic teachings, that if you get a bad thought, you have the opportunity to elevate it, okay? There's a way to elevate a thought. And basically what the Tanya is going to say is that's not for regular people, that's only for tzaddikim. And so he says like this, and don't be a fool to try and elevate the emotional content of the inappropriate thought back to its source, a practice known from the Baal Shem Tov. So he's talking to people who read the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, and they might think the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov apply to them, and instead of diverting their mind, they want to uplift the thought. And the Baal Shem Tov says, you can't uplift the thought, and he's going to give a very interesting explanation why. But so let's read over here. So even if you never thought of uplifting your thought, we're going to look into this because at the end of it has a very fascinating lesson. So he says like this: the advice to divert your attention away from inappropriate thoughts immediately represents a retreat from the early Hasidic teachings, which advise that such thoughts should be elevated. The Baal Shem Tov taught a method of elevating inappropriate thoughts and reuniting them with their source based on the principle that every negative energy is ultimately rooted in a positive one from which it has fallen. By lifting the energy back to its source, the fallen energy is realigned with its positive root. So this is a true concept. The true concept is that everything in this world comes from a holy place. So even inappropriate things come from good places, right? Even Esau, right? Esau comes from Jacob, comes from Isaac. Everything negative in this world originates in a positive place. So there was a concept that you might be able to take negative thoughts and elevate them back to their root source, and in their root source, they're holy. So Tanya is going to tell you that's not for us, but let's continue. For example, a thought or desire of or lust is a fallen energy of chesed, kindness, and so you would, so to speak, right? So, for example, what is lust? Lust is love, but it's love to the wrong place. So you would turn that energy to a different direction. But he says this advice was only meant for tzaddikim. If you recall, in the last chapter, we discussed how there's overcoming and there's transforming, and we discussed that transforming is mostly not for us. That's exactly the same thing here. The Tanya, again, it's all the concepts are coming back. That's really the beauty of the Tanya, is that once we get to the troubleshooting, all of the concepts we spoke about earlier now help us understand all these different issues we face in our lives. And so the Tanya will tell us, you're having bad thoughts during your prayer, that's because you have two souls. You're thinking of elevating the bad thoughts, that's not for you. You're a Beinoni. That's for a tzaddik. Only tzaddiks are great at transforming. We're not typically going to transform. So let's continue. For this advice is only meant for tzaddikim. The Tanya warns its readership not to dabble in this practice. For most of us, dwelling on lustful thoughts is likely to lead to more lustful thoughts. When you get into a boxing ring, you get dirty. So if you're going to fight with your lustful thoughts, it's not going to be very useful. And he's going to give a very fascinating reason why. So let's continue. This, however, leaves us with the question, if this technique was intended only for tzaddikim, righteous people, why are they having inappropriate thoughts at all? Didn't we learn that a tzaddik has refined himself to the extent that he's no longer plagued by such thoughts? Good question, right? So if a tzaddik is having inappropriate thoughts, then how is he a tzaddik? So he answers, for when these tzaddikim have inappropriate thoughts, they are not a product of their own negative energies, but from the negative energies of others. Fascinating. So here we have an insight, just an interesting insight into, let me just back out of it here. We have a fascinating insight into the life of a tzaddik. A tzaddik, when they have a bad thought, it's actually not their own bad thoughts. Our bad thoughts come to them. Can you imagine that? We have a bad thought, and then it pops in their head. But when it pops into their head, it doesn't rattle them because it's not their thought. So it's not, and they can elevate the thought. So you have a little inkling into the life of a tzaddik. All right, so he says, there is a fundamental interconnectedness of all souls, even those who enjoy close relationships in this world. Therefore, it is possible that while a tzaddik may not have inappropriate thoughts stemming from his own desires, he may be plagued by thoughts from the negative energy he has absorbed from his disciples or others close to him. It is that in that case, the Baal Shem Tov's method is applicable. But now he's going to say something very, very important. So he says, a tzaddik can elevate bad thoughts because they're not his thoughts. But let's continue. And this is the line that I wanted to focus on. But when your own inappropriate thoughts caused by the evil in your heart's left chamber pop into your mind, how could you possibly lift them upwards when you yourself are tied below? You can't free your inappropriate thoughts from the powers of Klippa so long as you remain tied up and enmeshed within the Klippa itself. Elevating inappropriate thoughts then is not an option, and your choice is to divert your attention from them immediately before they entice you further. So this is a very, very classic idea in Jewish teachings, and it's a classic idea in the Rebbe's teachings very much so as well. And that is very simply that there's a concept in the Talmud called Ein Chavush Matir Et Atzma B'Beit HaSorim. If you're a prisoner in prison, you cannot free yourself, right? Prison breakouts usually happen when there's someone on the outside helping them. The prisoner themselves cannot get themselves out. You need someone on the outside to help you get out. And I go visit a prison once in a while. There was a guy, he hit a whole scheme. He was having a helicopter come to save him. Yeah, he's been placed under higher security since then. But typically, if you want to break out of prison, you need some help from the outside. And that's really what the Tanya here is saying, is that you cannot free yourself from your own thoughts by fighting with them. In other words, if the cause of the thoughts is you, if you are the reason why you're having those thoughts, then, so now you're not a third party, you are the party to the bad thoughts. So how are you going to extricate yourself from that? You can, that's what Tanya says, just go to, just focus on positive thoughts. You cannot fight it. Think about, at a very simple level, it mentioned here in the Tanya, lustful thoughts. Someone is having lustful thoughts. The cause of their lust is they're just a typical human being. They're not a tzaddik. And so they have these thoughts. And so fighting it is really not going to go very far. It's much better to divert your attention to doing something positive. Or someone, let's go with someone going on a diet and they're being tempted by brownies, okay? In the beginning of the temptation to brownies, trying to fight the temptation for the brownies it's not going to work. You have to find replacement. You have to find other things you're going to think about. Spending your time you're eventually, if you keep fighting something that's a part of you, you're going to lose. And this was advice the Rabbi used to tell people a lot. And it was actually, we brought it up in the last two chapters as well. But that is when someone has thoughts and desires, in the beginning, the best way to deal with it is to put it out of your mind. Find other things to think about. You can only deal with the consequences of those thoughts years down the line once it's kind of no longer a part of who you are. So if you're struggling with something, that's another example is kosher, right? We spoke about that as well. If you struggle with kosher, stop, stop trying to fight it. You have to find other things to replace it. And then years down the line, you can maybe deal with so, let me back up. The Rebbe would tell people not to like do teshuvah, not even to like do special repentance for sins unless they were like years and years past it. Because when you're too close to it, just the thought of repentance about those sins will bring you back to them because you have to now think consciously about them. And when you think consciously about them and you're still, so to speak, enmeshed in that type of world, it's so easy to get pulled back in there. And so what the Tanya here is saying as well is that if we are getting thoughts while we're praying, we have to remember we're not a tzaddik, we're enmeshed in these things. And it's not our job to try and elevate them or work with them. It's our job to put them out of our mind and find something else to think about. Now, he will have at the end of the chapter, what if that doesn't work? Okay, there is a discussion about that. What if that doesn't work? But this is his first line of defense. His first piece of advice is don't try and fight it. So let's say you're praying. Okay, so you're praying, and a thought about a large business transaction comes up. You remember, tomorrow you have this big business meeting and you're worried about it. And then you tell yourself, I really shouldn't be thinking about this. I really should be praying. Yeah, I know, but it's a big deal. But I really have to pray because all my blessings come from Hashem. And so you go back and forth. That's a fight. You're having a fight now. You don't want to fight. Fighting is the easiest thing to do is just look at your prayer book and look at the words and focus on what you're reading. Don't fight about why you should be praying. Just go ahead and pray. That's really the Tanya's advice here, is that don't get into a fist fight with these thoughts. Remember that the thoughts are coming from a different soul. And if we recall, we had earlier in the Tanya told us that the first thought that pops into our mind is not a problem, so to speak. That's to be expected. The animal soul can throw out us thoughts. It's whether we continue thinking about those thoughts, that's already up to us. That was one of the discussions of the Tanya. Because we have two souls, the animal soul can throw at us thoughts. What we do with that thought in the second moment is up to us. So again, I believe that this idea that we shouldn't be foolish, that we have to know that we cannot free ourselves is a very important thing. Know that we are so distractible that if we even try and fight with these thoughts, we are very liable to use. We're very liable to lose. Just to tell an interesting story. There's a story of the Maggid of Mezrich. Now, he was a tzaddik, but the story was told to us because it's a lesson for us. That the story of the Maggid of Mezrich was one time he was traveling with his students, and he needed to pray. And he kept looking for a hotel, but every hotel he went into, there were a bunch of goyim. It used to be in the hotels. People used to get, when I say goyim, I mean a bunch of, not necessarily goyim, but there were a bunch of people there sitting and drinking. It was like the thing to do back in the day. There was no TV. People would drink. So he would walk into hotel to hotel, and in the lobby, everybody there was drinking. There was always a tavern, a bar. So finally, it was getting too close to the time of prayer, so he walked into a bar, and then they started praying. And all the drunk people there were screaming and everything. But as they started to pray, the room got quieter and quieter until during the Amidah, the silent prayer, the room was quiet. Everybody, all the drinkers, the whole bar was quiet. So at another occasion, the Maggid of Mezrich explained that what happened to him is really an indication of what happens to every Jew as we get up in the morning. He says, when we get up in the morning, we have like the whole screaming tavern at us. Everything sets into our mind, but and we're not ready to pray yet. But he says at the end of the day, we just have to start praying. And as we start to pray, the more the prayer goes, the more the thoughts dissipate. And so that this story of the Maggid of Mezrich is really the lesson of what should be in our lives. Yes, when we start to pray, the moment we get ready to pray, we think about all the things we need to do, and like, do I really have time to pray? But as you get more and more into your prayer, that's really the idea. The more and more you get into your prayer, the quieter those thoughts will be. Of course, if you're not concentrating on your prayer, those thoughts will of course disturb you. Okay. Um, um, okay, let's take a look at the next thing I want to say is the Tanya is next going to talk about that we should make sure when we pray. He said, remember that we have two souls. You cannot, don't. If you're getting bad thoughts, just move off. Don't think about it. Now he's going to discuss, and also don't be depressed by the fact that you're being disturbed during your prayer. Now, I already discussed in the beginning of the class, but again, his point here is, and we discussed it in previous chapters, don't be depressed. Why? Because we know that we are Beinonim. We are people who have a good soul and an evil soul. The good soul and the evil soul can disturb us. But this brings us to the topic of what I was discussing before the class, and that is know that when you pray, the evil inclination is going to try and put in more effort. I'll just give an example. This morning, I didn't eat until 11:30. Why? Whatever, I was busy. It wasn't that important to me to eat till 11:30. Um, I can I don't want to promise you, but I can probably bet you that if today was a fast day where I was not allowed to eat where I was not allowed to eat the whole day, I would be disturbed by thoughts of eating already from 8 o'clock, right? Or 7 o'clock or whatever. But since it's a day where I'm allowed to eat, so when I choose not to eat, nothing bothers me, right? And so the same thing is the animal soul. When we're just going about our business, he doesn't need to bother us. But when we're trying to actively serve God, then he's going to put in the most effort. And in fact, just like when you're fighting an enemy, the enemy puts in the most effort when it feels it's really being, it's put into a cage, as they call it, right? The same thing over here is when the animal soul sees what you're doing, it'll fight back really hard. Just to give you an interesting example, we were talking about righteous people. Blowing a shofar is not that hard. It's not a big chachma. It's not that hard. The Rebbe used to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, the first blast of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. And you can ask anybody who was there. It was always very difficult. The Rebbe would switch shofars in the middle, and it wouldn't always come out right away. And it wasn't just the Rebbe. Many great tzaddikim would have the same thing. And we understand the reason is because for us, we blow the shofar. When a tzaddik is blowing the shofar, it's a very spiritual service, fighting the powers of impurity. And so we understand when a tzaddik is blowing the shofar, it's not just simple, I'm blowing a shofar. It's he's fighting the powers of impurity, and therefore it's difficult, it's hard, it's not easy. Because at the moment of such great spirituality, the unclean side, the evil inclination, is going to work at its hardest. And there's so many stories about this, by the way, about many great tzaddikim, about how they were born through crazy stories. Because in order for great light and great spirituality to come to this world, it doesn't come easy. Just to tell you one more story, there was a story of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev was one time fundraising to get some Jews out of prison. Back in the day, if a Jew had a landowner, and they didn't pay their rent, they would typically be thrown into prison, and Jews would have to come together, collect money, and redeem them. This is very common, unfortunately, and so it was a big thing. Many tzaddikim used to go around and fundraise money to help buy Jews out of prison. So one time, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak was going around fundraising for a certain Jew to get him out of prison, and midway through the fundraising, he stopped. And he went home, and afterwards it turned out that the Jew he was fundraising for, it was a totally fabricated story. It was actually some Gentiles who had dressed up somebody like a Jew and pretended that he was their prisoner, but there really was nobody in prison. And so the people asked Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, how did you know that the whole thing was a fabrication? You know, why did you stop fundraising? And he says, listen, I went out there fundraising and it was too easy. I was getting all the money I needed. He says, I realized that there must be no Yetzer Hara here. That must be not a mitzvah. There was no Yetzer Hara. There was no evil inclination. Everybody was just giving the money. I knew that, it was, I knew there was a false story. This is a very interesting thing. So again, when there's a mitzvah going on, then our evil inclination will put in a lot more effort. So let's take a look and read this inside. And I think that's a very important thing for us to remember is when you're trying to do something good, that's when it's going to be the hardest. So now he continues. Nevertheless, don't allow your mood to be deteriorated from inappropriate thoughts. And allowed us to bring to sadness and self-loathing upon you during worship, which needs to be carried out with an abundance of joy. In chapter 26, we learned the all-encompassing. All right, whatever. We got that right. Let's go to the next paragraph. Rather, on the contrary, an inappropriate thought should strengthen you and intensify all your powers of concentration with more happiness and joy. So this is what I was saying before. When you're disturbed in your prayer, that should make you be more happy and concentrate more, because as I said, that's actually a sign that you're doing something good. Because again, when we remember that we have two souls, the reason that the animal soul is throwing a bad thought at you is because it realizes you're being successful. So let's continue. When you take to heart that the inappropriate thought pops into your mind from the klipa in your heart's left chamber, right? That's where your animal soul resides, which in your case of the aspiring or actual Beinoni is in competition with your divine soul. And everyone knows that in a fight or wrestling match, when one person is winning, the competitor tries to make a comeback with all his might. Let's take a look at the Chassidic thought at the bottom of the page. An inappropriate thought is a sign of your success in prayer, so it should spark joy. When your animal soul saw that it's losing the competition, it felt the need to fight back, and so threw you the thought. Instead of getting depressed at however hard you try to concentrate, you cannot rid yourself of inappropriate thoughts. Say to yourself, whoa, I was praying with such devotion. My animal soul felt really threatened and tried to do something about it. It must be really doing well. So it's impressive, but this is what the Tanya gives to us, is perspective. It gives us an amazing perspective that when you're disturbed in your prayers, it's actually a sign you're successful in your prayers. It's amazing. It's a beautiful thought. So he continues, and therefore, when your divine soul intensifies its energies to pray, the klipa intensifies itself against your divine soul to disorient your divine soul and derail it with an inappropriate thought. The above analysis runs contrary to the popular misconception of those who mistakenly argue that their prayers are rendered worthless by inappropriate thoughts, arguing that if they had prayed acceptably and properly, they would have been free from inappropriate thoughts. All right, so now he's going to address that head on. He says, but doesn't the presence of these thoughts represent a failure at some level? And he says, no, again, it's all based on understanding the Tanya. If we understand the Tanya, that we have two souls, then of course, no, it cannot be a sign of a badness of the soul. So let's continue. If we each had just one soul, then they would have been correct. Since if the same soul that prayed was also the one thinking inappropriate thoughts, then it's either praying properly or it isn't. And the presence of inappropriate thoughts indicates that it isn't. But in actual fact, you have two souls competing with each other in your brain, the desire and the will of each one being to control you, to fill your mind exclusively with its influence. So the presence of the inappropriate thoughts does not reflect negatively on the devotion of your soul, since all your thoughts of Torah and fear of heaven come from your divine soul. Again, people don't realize that with the Tanya, everybody who doesn't study the Tanya understands we have a good thoughts and bad thoughts. The classic depiction of, right, the good angel on one shoulder and the bad angel on the other shoulder. The problem with that depiction is that there's still one head in the middle, right? So again, in the depiction of the classic model of good and bad and people's two thoughts is you have a good one, an angel on one side and an angel on the other side, and there's just one person in the middle. But if that's the case, we may get depressed by having bad thoughts, because we might think that I'm listening too much to the devil, right? Because I'm only one head. So if I'm praying and then suddenly I'm getting bad thoughts, that means I'm listening to the devil too much. But once the Tanya tells us that no, there's actually two souls, it's really not fair to depict it as two angels on one head. It's really like throw the head away. I don't know, it sounds weird, right? It's almost like there's the two sides battling each other, and you got to try and push one over the other. In other words, it's much more a part of you. The depiction of the two angels makes them seem external, and so that's why you might think the moment you're listening and you're having bad thoughts, you're listening to something bad. But once we understand it's two souls that are a part of you, when you have a bad thought during prayer, it's not that you're listening to something external. There's a part of you that is coming out right now. Now, you have the option to ignore it. You have the option to not continue with it. But the presence of such a thought in and of itself does not indicate that you are a bad person. And that's a very important distinction that comes out from this the Tanya. And so with the Tanya's principle, the fact that you have a bad thought during prayer is not a problem. Now let's continue. So let's continue. Whereas all the thoughts, right, so he said all the good thoughts come from your godly soul, and all the thoughts of worldly matters come from your animal soul. The two types of thought, appropriate and inappropriate, are like different voices in your head emanating from a different place. If there was just one you, then a failure to concentrate at all the time of prayer might be disappointing. But since you actually have two selves, an intense competition means that some real devotion is emanating from the higher you and the lower you is fighting back. All right, so this explains why when we have bad thoughts during prayer, it's not necessarily an indictment on who we are. It's a sign that actually we're winning the war, and the animal soul wants to prevent us. All right. But now he's going to ask a question. But if your two souls, but if your two souls have such different personalities, why do you feel like one person? Why don't you literally hear two voices in your head? So he explains. Only the divine soul is dressed in the animal soul. The divine soul does not have direct access to the body and acts via the medium of the animal soul in which it must dress. Therefore, your consciousness is uniform and you do not sense the presence of two souls. But the Tanya teaches your metaphysical constitution is fundamentally split between two energies, radically altering the significance of lack of concentration in prayer. This is a topic we discussed earlier in the Tanya. It's a very interesting idea that we are the godly soul is enmeshed in the animal soul. The godly soul is too spiritual to really be manifest in a body, in a physical body. And that's one of the purposes of the animal soul. The godly soul has to enmesh itself in the animal soul. But this is actually a very good thing, because that means when we do mitzvahs, we're also operating through the animal soul, because the animal soul is always required. The godly soul operates through the animal soul. So it's fascinating. Though we have two souls, they've kind of been stuck together. They've kind of been enmeshed, and it's really a very difficult. That's why we cannot really differentiate and recognize that we have two souls many times, because they can seem to be all the same thing. But the reality is that we have two souls, and when we have bad thoughts, it's coming from the animal soul. When we have good thoughts, it's coming from the godly soul. They seem to be coming from the same place because our souls are enmeshed. But as I mentioned, the fact that our souls are enmeshed is actually a good thing, because that means when we do a mitzvah, our godly soul is elevated. Okay. Let us continue in the inside here. Any questions or comments before I continue here? No?
I do have a question.
Okay.
You mentioned that we don't fight if we have those thoughts, we just think about something else. But isn't that a distraction as well? Thinking about something else?
He's talking about during prayer, during Torah study. In other words, if we have life issues, we can deal with those issues. He's not against dealing with issues, but all in the right time. So if I'm finally sitting down to study and I'm having general life issues, I should deal with those, but not necessarily right now. Okay. So once I've sat down to study, all right, so it's not against anybody going to a therapist or anybody trying to deal with their life issues. It's just when you deal with it. That's kind of been the theme of the last chapters, the last couple chapters, is
Oh,
knowing when and when not to deal with something. Huh?
that's not what I mean. I mean, like, let's just say you are right, you are the shul, you are praying, and you start thinking about, I don't know, whatever. So you said to think about something else, but what is something else?
Oh, what is the something else? Okay, I got it. The something else is the prayer. So instead of trying to tell yourself, I shouldn't be thinking that, I mean, you could tell yourself that in a split second, but don't like try and fight with the thought. Look at your prayer book and look at the words and focus on the words. If you're having trouble with the words themselves, and then maybe you need to study more about the prayer itself. But that's the first step. The first step is to focus on what you're saying, the words that you're saying, the prayers that you're saying, and the meaning in what you're saying. Try and delve into it. Um, Again, as a someone who's been praying for many years, I can very easily disappear in my thoughts because the words literally come out of my mind like this. They'll come out of my mouth. They can come out of my mouth and I cannot be thinking about it. So the simplest way is to read the words. What I'm saying is, for me, just reading the words themselves is not enough. It doesn't help me because I could say the words and still be having thoughts. So I have to think, the more you get familiar with the prayers, the more you got to learn about the prayers. You have
The
to, huh?
like the only issue that I would have is like if somebody else is doing something to distract, because that is like somebody talking, in the back. So, and even that, I have, guess, learned how to just ignore that and just keep going on my prayer. And I just, for me, is not really an issue because I said, well, this is what I'm gonna do at this time, and basically like a set in stone there. This is what I'm gonna do, and I I keep going until that task is finished. But I understand a lot of people are thinking about problems or whatever they're thinking during prayer.
Right, right, right. Okay, yeah. So when I said thinking about other things, that's just a general idea.
Mhm.
If the way to stop thinking about one thing a lot of times is to think about something else. In this case, it's to be thinking about the task at hand, whether it's Torah study, whether it's prayer. Um, the um, the Tanya is actually going to talk right now about what if someone else is talking. Now it's bringing it as a parable, but there's a lot of truth to it. So let's take a look here. Uh,
Rabbi, can I ask a question or do you
yeah,
want me to ask later?
is it right on this topic what we just spoke about?
You basically if you how does the Shabbat additional soul add to the two souls? So I'm kind of confused about that. You can tell me later, but that's
Ah,
my the adding.
yeah. I'll
So do
answer
we
that
have
very
three
quickly.
of them
That's
on
a
Shabbat
Yeah, it's
or
a good
not?
question. All right, so she's asking, we're told that on Shabbat we get a neshama yisera, an extra soul. So if we're told we generally have two souls, does that mean on Shabbat we have three souls? The answer is the extra soul is actually not an extra soul, it's the deeper dimension of our godly soul. So it's still part of the godly soul.
Oh,
We just get a deeper dimension. Our souls are made up of 5 different levels, and on Shabbat
okay.
we get a deeper dimension of our godly soul, what is known as the level
Thank
of
you.
Tanya. And by then Yom Kippur, you get the deepest level of your soul. That's why Yom Kippur is once a year. You tap into the deepest level of your soul even more than a Shabbat. That's why there's 5 levels of the soul, and so every day we pray 3 prayers that correspond to the 3 basic levels of our soul. On Shabbat we have 4 prayers because we tap into the 4th dimension of our soul. That's the extra soul. And Yom Kippur we pray 5 prayers because we tap into the deepest level of our soul. Okay, but good question. Okay, so now he's gonna say. Um, He says the situation is comparable to the case of a man praying with concentration, and a nasty heathen stands next to him and tries to distract him by talking and mouthing off at him. So here you're talking about the reason why he uses nasty heathen is because that's what he literally means. Not just someone who happens to be talking about his business. We're talking about, like, usually when you're in shul and someone's disturbing you, they're not trying to disturb you. They're just self-disturbed, right? They like to talk. They want to talk, so they're talking. It's not that they're trying to disturb you. They're just disturbing themselves. Here, he's giving an example. Imagine you're praying and this person is literally just standing there trying to disturb you. That's their entire goal. So he says, in this case, the best thing to do is definitely not to respond to the antagonist, neither positively nor negatively. but to act like a deaf man who does not hear. To fill the verse, do not answer a fool by his folly, lest you too become like him. One of my favorite sections from Proverbs. Again, do not answer a fool by his folly, lest you too become like him. You don't always argue with everybody, because then you just become like them. Some things don't deserve the dignity of response. Your inappropriate thought is just a clip on your heart trying to tease and taunt you when you are doing a nice job of devotional prayer. It is just a mental hooligan that is best ignored, just like this person that is literally trying to disturb you. If you answer them, then they've got what they wanted, and then they'll continue doing it, right? So this heathen that's disturbing you, you gain nothing by responding. You're just creating more issues. So now the question is, what about in shul when someone's disturbing you and they're talking? It's a little different. They're not trying to disturb you. They are just being busy with their friends. All right, so there's place to say we can ask people to be quiet as well in shul, obviously in the right way and in the right manner. That would be my takeaway from this, is that someone's literally trying to disturb you. There's no reason to respond to them. All right, so let's continue. So don't react in any way to inappropriate thought during prayer with an internal counter argument or a dialogue. For wrestling in it with a filthy person, you too become filthy. If you were to hang around disgusting and immoral people, their influence would eventually rub off on you. So don't hang around with your negative thoughts either. Don't let them get under your skin. If you entertain them for more than just a moment, they will start to corrupt you. Just act as if you were unaware of the inappropriate thoughts that popped into your head and you didn't hear them. Wipe them away from your mind and intensify your powers of concentration. Just to give an interesting story here. The Hasidic Chabad, the Chabad followers, used to pray at length. And someone who wasn't Chabad one time came to one of the rabbis of Chabad and said, "Why do you pray at length?" He said, so the rabbi, isn't it better to pray quickly so you don't get disturbed by your thoughts? And he brought a parable. He says, imagine you're in a wagon and there's somebody bad trying to get into the wagon. So you go faster so the bad person can't get on the wagon. He says, similarly, when we pray, we should pray quickly so we don't get disturbed and don't let the bad thoughts come into our mind. So the Rebbe Marash answered him and said, that's only true if the bad person is outside of the wagon. Yes, then going faster, you prevent the bad person from getting into your wagon. But if that bad person is already inside your wagon, it doesn't help to go fast. He's there. If anything, you have to go slow and push him out. So he said the same thing is here, is when it comes to prayer. This is why prayer, the Hasidim used to pray at length. They were trying to delve into the prayer, to meditate, to contemplate, because the animal soul's already inside the wagon. He's already there with us. He's coming to pray with us. He's right there with us. And in order to get rid of him, we can't just speed through the prayers because he'll be there the whole time, the whole long prayer. Then no matter how fast you read, he'll be there the whole time. We need to double down and focus. And the more we focus, and the deeper we can focus, and that takes time, the more the animal soul will disappear. Just to tell one more story about this, a very interesting story. The story was that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, the great Rebbe, we spoke about in a moment. One time he was appointed to be the chazan, the cantor, for the slichot prayers, and he stood there for an hour, and then he screamed in the synagogue. He says, "If you're the chassid and you're the tzaddik, then you should pray." And he walks off. So they asked him, what went on over here? Who are you talking to and what happened here? So he says, listen, I came to pray the slichot prayers and my evil inclination came with me and said, I'm also coming to pray. So I told him, how did you show up? I'm a student of the Maggid of Mezrich. He said, well, I'm also a student of the Maggid of Mezrich. So I told him, but I went for private audience with the Rebbe. He said, I also went for private audience. So we kept arguing back and forth. Everything I said, he said he was right there with me till eventually I said, all right, so if you're the tzaddik and you're the chassid, then you lead the prayers. So again, these stories are told to us. They're not really meant for us to, I think, they're kind of out there. But the point is, the lesson that we get from it is that the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is not something that's external. He's very internal to us. And understanding that helps us understand that getting into a fist fight with him when he's internal inside of us is not going to be helpful. If it was something external, I could punch him and send him away. He's inside of me. I'm going to get fight and get dirty and everything, and it's not going to work out. And so the best thing is to focus on my prayers, and the more I double down on my prayers, and the more concentration I can get, the better I can, the more likely I am to be able to pray in peace. Now he's going to end up with one more thought. And the final thought is, what if all of this doesn't work? So we have a good idea. We said you should refocus your mind, focus on your prayers, focus on your Torah study. Now's not the time to deal with this. But what if I try all that and it doesn't work? And this is the beauty of the Tanya. He says, it's possible too. It's possible that it won't work. It's possible. In such a scenario, he's going to give us advice as well. So let's take a look what his advice is in such a case. So he says, let's read over here. When all else fails, of course, this is easier said than done. What do you do if the inappropriate thoughts keep coming back again and again? And he says, if you find it hard to wipe away inappropriate thoughts from your mind because they intrude on your mind with great force, then humble yourself before God and implore him in your mind. There is no need to interrupt your words of prayer. Just implore God in your mind. Because again, we're talking to someone who's in the middle of prayer, not someone who's in the middle of Torah study in this scenario. But if you're in the middle of Torah study, you actually could implore God with words. And again, he says, implore him to have pity on you, great pity, like the pity of a father on his children, who are derived from his brain manifest in his seed. That was a discussion of chapter 2, how we come from God. Implore God to have the same pity on your divine soul, which is derived from him, to save your soul from the raging waters of your turbulent mind, which is constantly disturbed by the animal soul. Implore him to do it, not because of your merit, but for his own sake, for his people are literally a part of God. So here he is saying like this, and this prayer, I think we brought up a couple times. Sometimes we pray to God for mercy. What does mercy mean? Mercy can mean many things. So typically when we say mercy, mercy typically means I'm not necessarily deserving, but I'm asking for mercy anyways. That's what mercy really is. In other words, if I was deserving, I could say I'm deserving, but asking for mercy means I'm not deserving. And so we generally understand that we may not be deserving of God's blessings, but we ask for God's great mercy. And we add here 2 reasons why God should have mercy on us. Number 1 is because he's our father and we're his children. Number 2, an even deeper level, we're actually a part of him because we have a godly soul. And so not only should he have mercy upon us as a father has mercy upon his child, God should have mercy on us because by having mercy on our godly soul, he's having mercy on himself, so to speak. And that is why it is so important that's our reason that we ask God to have mercy on us. So here is what I think such a powerful thought. This last section of Tanya, it's like thrown it there at the end of this chapter, and many people might miss it, but I think it's such a powerful thought, and that is that when all else fails, pray to Hashem. In other words, we can read the Tanya from today to tomorrow. We could study anything you study, really, and any type of divine service of God, and all the best advice. The Tanya basically says, and sometimes everything you try just doesn't work. Everything you're trying is just not going to work. And when that happens, then the only thing left is to turn to God and pray. Now you say, why didn't I pray to God earlier that God should get rid of my evil thoughts? You can pray to God to help you, yes, but God wants to see you try, right? God helps those who help themselves, as the old joke goes, or, there's a whole bunch of jokes around this, or a whole bunch of stories around this. The idea is that, we ask for mercy when we've tried everything. And so the Tanya first gives us all the advice that we need to try. But then, as a classic Jew always does, when we've tried everything and nothing worked, we once again turn to God to pray and say, God, when we ask him for mercy, not because we're deserving, we ask him when we say, God, we've tried our best and we need you. We need you. That's what prayer is about. So what's the takeaway from this chapter? The takeaway from this chapter is a couple things. Number one is in the middle of prayer and in the middle of Torah study, you are going to experience more disturbances than usual. So if you're normally disturbed, you're suddenly going to be studying and you're going to think, oh my gosh, I need to check on something on my phone. Oh, yes, yes. You're gonna, right? The disturbances that may come to your mind with greater frequency than when you're watching a movie. Okay, so look at it. How disturbed are you when you're doing something that you enjoy versus how disturbed are you when you're doing Torah or prayer? Okay, think about it next time. And then to realize that those disturbances are coming from the animal soul, and he's going to put in a stronger effort when we are trying to pray. And so if you're bitten by the urge to be disturbed during your prayer, during your Torah study, recognize where it's coming from and automatically don't try to fight it. Just say, hey, listen, I'm busy, and get back to what you're doing. Just, all right, I appreciate the thought. I'm busy. I'm doing what I have to do. But it is so common that during prayer, we're disturbed, and there's so many things we want to do. Like you see this in shul all the time. It's very common. All the important things that we need to do suddenly appear when we show up to synagogue. And like I said, what you'll find is a lot of times if you just wait, those things will not seem important. That's number one. Number two is the other big lesson I take away from this chapter is when all else fails, it's time to pray to God. And my third lesson that I get from this chapter is really how the whole well, I don't know if it's a lesson, but the section from the Psalm, and I think this applies. It's a general life thought, is that how much do we want to deal with our problems? And it depends on the problem, of course, but I don't think we have the capacity to deal with all our problems in life. Seriously, I know it sounds weird. There are big issues that we have to deal with, but sometimes minor issues are just best dealt with by doing something positive. Sometimes we try to explain too much. We'll think of a weird example. Let's say you wronged someone. Sometimes you come to apologize, you try to explain too much. It's less helpful than just telling them sorry, I messed up. Or let's say yeah, sometimes negative things in life, the easiest way to move on is just by doing something positive. I'm not saying it applies all the time and in every scenario. I'm just throwing out an idea based on this chapter, is that sometimes when you're faced with negativity and negativity of the world, doing just you can fight it, or you can go ahead and doing something positive. And sometimes just go ahead and doing something positive is the right course of action at that time. Anyways, I'm gonna end it here, and we'll see you all next week. There's no class tomorrow.